I came home early to surprise my husband with good news. Instead, I stood frozen outside our bedroom door, listening to him plot my murder with his mistress. The life insurance money, the timeline, the method, everything. They had no idea I was about to flip their entire plan. Before I tell you how I survived and got my revenge, please hit that like button and subscribe, because this story has twists you won't believe. And I promise the karma at the end is absolutely worth it. My name is Elena Rodriguez, and 3 years ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. I was 34, working as a pharmaceutical sales director in Seattle, pulling in a solid six-figure income. My husband Daniel was a commercial real estate investor, charming, successful, and seemingly devoted. We met at a charity fundraiser, one of those black tie events, where everyone's trying to network, but I actually felt a real connection. He was funny, attentive, and made me feel like I was the only woman in the room. We dated for 2 years before he proposed on a beach in Maui at sunset. It was perfect. The wedding was beautiful, 150 guests, and we honeymooned in Greece. Life felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. We lived in a gorgeous home in Queen Anne, had 2 cars, good jobs, and were talking about starting a family. Daniel was generous with gifts, always remembered anniversaries, and his friends loved him. My family adored him. My mother used to say I'd won the lottery. I believed her. Sure, there were small things that bothered me over the past 6 months. He started working late more often. His phone was always face down on the table, and he'd changed all his passwords. But I trusted him. I chose to believe in our marriage. I chose to ignore that nagging feeling in my gut that something wasn't quite right. Then about 4 months before everything fell apart, Daniel brought up increasing my life insurance policy. He said we needed to be responsible, that if anything happened to either of us, the other should be financially secure. It made sense at the time. We were planning for kids, thinking about the future. I signed the papers without much thought. $3 million. I remember joking that I was worth more dead than alive. He laughed and kissed my forehead. Now I know he was already planning how to collect. The day that changed everything started so normally. I had a huge presentation scheduled with a potential client, a pharmaceutical contract worth millions to my company. I'd been preparing for weeks. That morning, Daniel kissed me goodbye and told me he was proud of me. I remember feeling so loved, so supported. But 2 hours before the presentation, the client's assistant called to reschedule. Their CEO had a family emergency and had to fly out of state. Just like that, my afternoon was completely free. I decided to surprise Daniel. Maybe we could have a romantic evening, reconnect a little. We'd both been so busy lately. I stopped at his favorite Italian deli and picked up imported salami, fresh mozzarella, and crusty bread. I grabbed a bottle of the wine he loved and one of those expensive cigars he only smoked on special occasions. I was actually excited, thinking about how happy he'd be to see me home early. When I pulled into our driveway, around 2 in the afternoon, I noticed Daniel's car was there, which was unusual for a Wednesday. He typically had property viewings all day. There was also an unfamiliar silver BMW parked down the street. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a neighbor had guests. I grabbed my bags and headed inside, already planning what I'd say when I surprised him. The front door was unlocked. I could hear voices upstairs, and then I heard a woman's laugh. My heart started racing, but I told myself it was probably his sister Claire. She'd been having problems with her husband and sometimes came over to talk. I quietly set down the bags and started up the stairs, planning to announce myself. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the tone of the voices, intimate and low. Maybe it was instinct finally breaking through my denial. I stood in the hallway outside our bedroom door, and that's when my entire world shattered into pieces I'd never be able to put back together the same way. $3 million. Daniel, that's life-changing money. The voice belonged to Brooke Ashford, Daniel's so-called business associate. I'd met her twice at company events. She was beautiful, confident, and I'd never suspected a thing. The new policy just went through last month. Daniel replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. We wait 3 months, maybe 4. Any sooner raises red flags with the insurance company. They investigate thoroughly when the policy is new. I used my settlement strategically. Every dollar became a brick in a new foundation. Literally, I created Harmony Rising, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free music education and instruments to children in low-income neighborhoods throughout New York and New Jersey. We partnered with schools in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Newark, places where arts programs had been gutted by budget cuts. But here's what made it different from the performative charity I'd done as Donovan's wife. I didn't just write checks and pose for photos. I showed up. I taught master classes. I performed for these kids, really performed, pouring 15 years of abandonment and rediscovery into every note. I watched their faces light up when they realized that music could be theirs, that they didn't have to be rich or connected or perfect to deserve beauty in their lives. One of my students, a 15-year-old from the South Bronx named Marcus, had never touched an instrument before joining our program. 6 months later, he earned a full scholarship to Juilliard. A local news station covered his story, and they interviewed me about the foundation. The reporter asked what inspired Harmony Rising, and I answered honestly. I forgot who I was for a long time. Music reminded me. I want these kids to never forget. That clip went viral. Suddenly, international press was calling. The Guardian ran a feature. Former billionaire's wife finds purpose in music education. Forbes did a profile on nonprofits with measurable impact. But it wasn't the attention that mattered. It was that the work was real. The impact was genuine. And for the first time in 15 years, I was building something that was mine. Major donors took notice. We expanded to 3 more cities. I published a report on the correlation between music education and academic performance in underserved communities. I testified before the New York City Council about arts funding. I was becoming someone I'd never been before. Not Donovan's wife, not anyone's appendage, but Gabrielle, just Gabrielle. And she was magnificent. 18 months after my divorce, I received an invitation to the Metropolitan Museum's annual philanthropy gala. $10,000 a plate. The kind of event I used to attend on Donovan's arm, wearing borrowed confidence and forced smiles. But this invitation was different. Harmony Rising was being honored for community impact, and I was invited as a guest of honor. My first instinct was to decline. The thought of seeing Donovan and Lorelei, of facing that world again, made my hands shake. But Naomi found the invitation on my counter and said, "Mom, you have to go. You have to show him who you really are, who I really was, not who he'd said I was, but who I'd become." I wore a deep emerald gown, not because it was expensive, but because green had always been my color. Before Donovan convinced me I looked better in black and navy, colors that helped me fade into the background of his shine. I wore my natural hair in an elegant crown of braids, the hair he'd always wanted me to straighten for professional events. And I walked into that gala with Dr. Winters and 3 of my students whose lives had been transformed by Harmony Rising. The moment I entered that gilded hall, I felt eyes turn. Whispers rippled through the crowd. And then I saw him. Donovan was standing near the bar with Lorelei, and the expression on his face when he saw me was something I'll treasure forever. It wasn't attraction, though that was there. It was shock mixed with something deeper, recognition. He was seeing me, really seeing me, maybe for the first time in years. Lorelei looked uncomfortable in her designer gown, clinging to his arm with the desperation of someone who knows she's interchangeable. She saw where he was looking and followed his gaze, and I watched her face fall. Then came my moment on stage. The MC introduced Harmony Rising's work, showed a video of my students performing, shared statistics about our impact. When he called my name, the room erupted in a standing ovation. I gave a speech I'd written and rewritten a dozen times about finding yourself after loss, about how real beauty comes from purpose, about how the most valuable things we build are the lives we touch. The camera panned across the audience during my speech, and I saw Donovan's face on the screen. His jaw was clenched. Lorelei was whispering urgently in his ear, but he wasn't listening. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read: regret, longing, loss. After my speech, I was surrounded by donors and journalists. I was riding this incredible high when I felt a presence beside me at the bar. I knew before I turned around that it was him. Gabriel. His voice was softer than I remembered. You look incredible, not just physically, though you do, but different. Like you're lit from within. I turned to face him. Up close, I could see he'd aged too. Find Brooke. Patricia looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your husband is planning to kill you. Until we have enough evidence to stop him, you are in active danger. Do you understand?" I understood. I understood that my life had become a thriller movie, except if I made the wrong move, I'd actually die. That evening I went home. Daniel was there, cooking dinner, music playing in the kitchen. He greeted me with a kiss and asked about my presentation. I lied and said it went well, that the client was impressed. He opened a bottle of wine to celebrate. I wanted to throw it in his face. Instead, I smiled and toasted to our future. That night, lying in bed next to him, knowing what he was planning, was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every time he moved, I tensed. Every sound made me jump. But I played my part perfectly. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia worked miracles. She got surveillance on Daniel and Brooke, legally obtained phone records through Miguel's connections, and dug into Daniel's finances. What she found was damning. Daniel's business was bankrupt. He owed over $400,000 to various creditors. He'd been renting an apartment for Brooke for 6 months under a fake company name. She recovered texts from a burner phone he kept hidden. The messages were explicit, not just about their affair, but about their plans, about me, about the insurance money, about our future that wouldn't include me in it. Patricia and Miguel devised a plan. The Portland conference was in 2 weeks, the perfect opportunity for Daniel to make his move. I would pretend to go but actually stay in Seattle. We'd catch Daniel in the act of tampering with my car, and the police would be there to arrest him. It was risky, but it was the cleanest way to get undeniable evidence of attempted murder. In the meantime, I had to prepare. I secretly moved money to a separate bank account Daniel didn't know about. I made copies of all our financial documents and gave them to Miguel. I changed my life insurance beneficiary to my brother without Daniel knowing. I wrote a detailed letter explaining everything and gave it to Miguel in a sealed envelope with instructions to open it if anything happened to me. I even started taking self-defense classes. If Daniel came at me, I wasn't going down without a fight. The day before the supposed Portland trip, I put on the performance of my life. I packed my bags while Daniel watched, chatting about the conference schedule and when I'd be home. He offered to check my car before the trip, make sure everything was running smoothly. My blood ran cold, but I smiled and said the dealership had already done a full service check. He looked disappointed for just a second before covering it with a smile. The next morning, I kissed him goodbye. He held me a little longer than usual and told me to drive safely. I said I loved him, and he said it back. I walked out that door, knowing it might be the last time I'd ever see him as a free man. I drove toward the airport, but circled back to Miguel's house. Patricia had set up a surveillance van 2 blocks from my home, with cameras pointed at every angle. Police were stationed discreetly nearby, ready to move in. Miguel, Patricia, and I sat in that van, watching monitors, waiting. An hour after I'd left, Brooke's BMW pulled into my driveway. We watched on camera as Daniel opened the door and pulled her into a kiss right there where any neighbor could see. He felt safe. He thought I was hours away, driving toward my death. They went inside for a few hours, and I don't want to think about what they were doing in my home, in my bed. But that evening, as the sun was setting, Daniel came out alone and walked into the garage. Patricia zoomed in the camera. We watched as he jacked up my car, slid underneath it with a wrench and a flashlight. And then we watched as my husband cut into my brake line. Not all the way through, just enough that it would fail after some driving. After I'd built up speed on a highway or mountain road, that's when the police moved in. I heard the sirens before I saw the lights. Patricia drove us closer, and I watched from down the street as officers surrounded my garage with weapons drawn. I saw Daniel emerge, covered in grease, confusion on his face that quickly turned to panic. I saw them put him in handcuffs. I saw Brooke run out of the house, screaming. They arrested her too, conspiracy to commit murder. I got out of the van and walked closer. Daniel saw me. The look on his face was something I'll never forget. Shock, horror, rage, and finally defeat. He knew that I'd known. He knew that he'd been caught. An officer approached and asked if I was Elena Rodriguez. I said yes. He told me I was safe now, that they had everything they needed. I burst into tears right there on the street I'd called home. Daniel denied everything at first, but when faced with surveillance footage, text messages, financial records, and witness testimony, even his lawyer told him to take a plea deal. He was sentenced to 18 years in prison, eligible for parole in 12. Brooke got 8 years for conspiracy. Her baby was born in prison and given to her parents to raise. Our divorce was finalized in 4 months. I got the house, both cars, and 70% of our remaining assets. The $3 million life insurance policy was canceled. The aftermath was harder than I expected. I had PTSD from the betrayal and from knowing how close I'd come to actually dying. I took 6 months off work and spent that time in therapy, processing the trauma. My family was incredible, especially Miguel, who'd literally saved my life. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild. It's been 2 years now. I was promoted to regional director at my company. I sold the house because I couldn't live with those memories and bought a beautiful condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the water. I'm dating someone new, a kind man who's patient with my trust issues and understands why I move slowly. I'm not the same person I was before this happened, but I'm stronger. I'm more careful. I trust my instincts now instead of ignoring them. Daniel is still in prison. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he's had a hard time adjusting to life behind bars. He lost all his friends when the truth came out. His own mother barely visits him. Brooke wanted nothing to do with him after the trial and testified against him to reduce her own sentence. The man who thought he could kill me and get away with it now sits in a cell, facing the consequences of his choices every single day. I walked through hell, but I walked through it, and now I use my experience to help others. I give talks about recognizing warning signs in relationships, about trusting your instincts, about the importance of having a support system. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it because it might save someone's life. Subscribe for more stories of survival and justice. Remember, trust your gut, protect yourself, and know that the truth always comes to light. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize you're stronger than you ever knew. Thank you for listening to my story.